So welcome again. In this lesson, we are now ready to go ahead and actually check our application on the simulator. And to do that, we have to change a few things in our list view controller. So let's go to our list view controller. And if you recall, we had a temporary user set up in our view.did_load. And this is going to happen every time, irrelevant of whether something is written to our disk or not. So what we're going to do is this. I'm going to go get myself a little bit of space. I'm going to add a new method called void read data. Read data. And this is a method that is going to stay with us for quite a few lessons. We're going to keep changing it and keep making it better and better to basically reflect the needs of our next things that we do. At the moment, it does something simpler, and then it becomes more and more and more complex. So what we're going to do is this. We don't want any of these temporary information. We want to go ahead and say in our view.did_load self read data. And let's see what does our read data do. The very first thing that we want to do in it, we want to read our current user. So I'm actually going to do this really step by step so we make sense of what's happening. I'm going to go to my list view controller.h, say import read user from disk. And I'm going to come in here and say the very first thing you do, read user from disk, read. So as you can imagine, now we have read our user from disk, and if that file has existed, we have something in our current user, but we don't know if that's really the case. So we have to go to our list view controller and say if shared instance dot current user does not equal nil, if there was actually something read in here. So what should we do if we read something in here? So what we're going to do is now read the data. So if there was a user, it means there is some data as well. So I'm going to go to .h, say import read data from disk. I'm going to come back here, say, well, if you read the current user and that current user exists, so then say read data from disk, read. So what happens if we read data from disk? What happens is it puts some information in our offline LSD. So now we got some things in our offline LSD. So let's go up here and say, well, if that was the case and you read that and you found some stuff, then say shared instance dot current LSD becomes shared instance dot offline LSD, simply because it is our current LSD that populates our table views everywhere in here. So we say if you read user and you read it existed and you read data, then make our current LSD based on that, and that's about it. But else, if you read the user and there was no one, it means this is the very first time we are loading this application. And because that's the case, we want to say, well, do this. Prepare first lists, prepare. Actually, I made a little mistake. We have to say, well, if this is the very first time, there is currently no users. So shared instance that current user becomes very similar to what we have done before. User class alloc init with, and let's call it, now I know the last time we called this Amir, but that's not a good idea because not every user is called Amir. So I'm going to call this one me. All right, so this is my stuff, and I'm going to say the email is default email and UID is default UID. So if there was no users, if we ended up here, make a dummy or the initial user based on me, default email and default UID, prepare my very first list, and most importantly, and that's very important, is okay, now we have a user and we have a first list that made, so we have to store those information. So I'm going to go to .h, say, well, import write user to disk and import write data to disk. And of course we go back here and I'm going to say if that happened, then write user to disk write and write data to disk write. Perfect. So if all works now, we should be able to get to see things properly. So the only thing is this, there is really no way to test this. We can try it, but every time is going to show us exactly the same thing. Because of that, before I jump into changing or testing our application, I'm going to add one more line of code. And that is, I'm going to go to my new list alert OK action. And I'm going to say, if you added a new list, also say write data to disk write. So basically save if a new list was made, which makes all the sense. If you make a new list, you want to save it. So that is for my new list alert OK action. And this is our current read data. Like I said, we're going to come back to this and we're going to make some changes. I'm going to give you a few seconds like this, and then I'm going to run this application. So let's run it. And the moment it loads, all right, so we got these two, sample list, office list. That's not, surprising. I'm going to go in here and say I've got a party, and it doesn't type for some reason. This sometimes happens. It's not a big deal. You have to actually switch back your keyboard back and forth. So I'm going to say party and hit OK. And of course, now we see the party here. If all has worked, if the information has correctly been written to my disk and is being read properly, if I stop this and rerun it, I should be able to see that. So let's go ahead and try. And voila, I've got it perfectly in there and everything is working. Before I finish this section, I just want to show you something very, very quickly. You don't really need to do this, just so that we know any of these files. I can just go in here and say, give me this section. This is a temporary thing. You don't need to do any of it. I'm going to go to my list view controller, view did load, and say nslog directory is at ducks directory. I just want to see that file on my simulator. This is one of the very interesting things that iOS simulator does. Android unfortunately doesn't do that. So this is the exact location. So I'm going to copy this whole thing, say copy. I'm going to go to my Finder, say go to folder, and this is the folder I want to go to. And this is exactly where those files are. You can actually open those files either with Xcode, or if you have a text editor such as Text Wrangler, the one that I can't usually use, and actually shows you all the information: list owner key, sample list, email key, so on and so forth. If you wanted to actually see your files, you can simply do it like that, find out where that directory exactly is in your simulator, in your application derivative data, and actually see the content of those files. Of course, we don't really need any of this, so I'm just going to delete them, but that's just for you if you wanted to see those files. So let's keep it up to here. Up until this moment, we have an application that we can see a list of different lists. We can add new lists to it. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how do we delete a list.